Hello, everyone, and welcome to this side event, Building Forward Better Through Inclusive Governance, working with sexual and gender minorities. My name is Anthony Oluoch, and I will be moderating this session. Just before we go on, I would like to urge everyone to switch to the channel, the interpretation channel that you feel comfortable in. This webinar is going to be simultaneously interpreted into English, French, and Portuguese. So everyone, at the bottom of your screen, there is a little globe, and you need to switch to the language that you are comfortable in, and then mute the original audio. So if you're in English, choose English. If you're choosing French, choose French. If you're choosing Portuguese, choose Portuguese. And then, so this is actually an official side event at the 7th session of the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. It is also the very first time ever that a forum on SDGs in any region has had an official event focused on sexual and gender diversity. So this is an incredibly exciting event for us. The side event is co-sponsored by Pan-Africa ILGA, CIVICUS, Positive Vibes, and UNDP. This is the second one of a series of webinars that we're doing. It's called Leaving No One Behind, the SDGs and LGBTI. Now, before we start, I want to get some housekeeping out of the way. As I said earlier, this session is being simultaneously interpreted into English, French, and Portuguese. So please, again, select the language that you're most comfortable with. It is going to run for 90 minutes and it will be very interactive. So be prepared to answer some questions. Now, not like in an exam, but just, to get us talking about some of the topics that we will be discussing. Feel free to post any questions or comments in the Q&A that will be at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A. You can post any comments, you can post any questions, and we will get to them as well. And then, so with all that out of the way, I just want to introduce this session. Now, both the SDGs and the Agenda 2063 share the guiding principle that no one will be left behind. And there is a commitment to prioritizing the poorest and the most marginalized. But there is also widespread evidence that sexual and gender minorities are often amongst the most socially, politically, and economically marginalized populations in Africa. These populations have been left behind because of systemic discriminations related to, amongst other factors, race, sex, gender, national, social origin, and disability. Despite these challenges, however, there is a range of good practice emerging in different countries of the continent, showing how inclusion of sexual and gender minorities in development policy and planning can improve the outcomes related to poverty, related to health, related to economic growth, related to inequality. And given the depth and breadth of discrimination against these populations, good practices related to sexual and gender minorities can almost certainly contribute to innovative thinking about inclusion of other marginalized populations as well. Now, with that in mind, and to take us through this conversation, we have four incredibly brilliant individuals from the continent. We have Honorable Dr. Ruth Laborde, who is a member of parliament in Zimbabwe and a fierce activist. We have Steve Letsike, who is the founding director of Access Chapter 2. We have also a fierce activist. We have Yvonne Muthoni, who is in Kenya and is the Kenyan country director for Open for Business. And we have Dr. Hilaire Nsabala. And you will please allow me to, you'll tell me how to pronounce your name properly, who is the national coordinator and the founder for the NGO Progress Santé Sans Prix. Now, like I said, we are going to start this engagement with a little bit of your input as the people who are listening and watching and listening to us. I'd like to start with a poll. Now, if we can get the first poll up on the screen. This is what we want to start with. Now, I want to ask two questions. And this is to get us into the work that we are already doing. Now, if your work for advocacy, if your work or advocacy focuses mainly on development and or SDGs, have you done any explicit work to promote LGBTI inclusions in the SDGs? So the question is, if your work or advocacy focuses mainly on development and or the SDGs, have you done any explicit work to promote LGBTI inclusion? The answer is 1, yes, 2, no, 3, not applicable. And the second question is, if your work or advocacy focuses mainly on LGBTI rights and inclusion, have you had the opportunity to represent LGBTI issues in broader SDG efforts? So if you're working specifically on LGBTI rights and inclusions, have you had the opportunity to represent LGBTI issues in broader SDG efforts? Again, the answers are 1, yes, 2, no, 3, not applicable. So let's start with asking you the question before we get into the conversation. And I will, like I said earlier, this is going to be a conversation between myself and the four absolutely brilliant panelists. It is not good that we will not have any presentations. So don't worry, we are not going to have a PowerPoint presentations. So it's just going to be our faces, our brilliant, beautiful faces. So once you've finished answering those questions, just click submit and we will start. Right. Right. So I'm hoping that we have all answered those questions. I don't know if you can get the results up on the screen. There. So we have the results, and this is actually going to be the basis of our conversation now. And I will start with you, Yvonne. As you can see, there are people who work on advocacy, whose advocacy work mainly is on development and SDGs, and a majority of the people, 63% of those who have answered said, yes, they have done explicit work to promote LGBTI inclusion in the SDGs. If you look at the second question, your work is mainly on LGBTI. Have they had the opportunity to represent LGBTI issues in the SDGs efforts? A majority of the people have said, yes, they have. But then there are others who have said, there's a 17% who said that no, they haven't. There's a 17% on both questions actually said no, that they have not either done explicit work to promote LGBTI inclusion in the SDGs, and they have not had the opportunity to represent LGBTI issues in the broader SDG efforts. Now, Yvonne, I'm going to ask you this question. Why do you think there is that disparity? And in terms of, while you're answering this question, just give us a bit of a background of what you do, and let's talk about the disparity and why is this inclusion good for business in Africa?
Thank you so much, Anthony. As Anthony has said, my name is Yvonne. I am the country director for Open for Business here in Kenya. I work mainly from Nairobi. My professional intersectionality lies between the private sector and the activist spectrum. I have been doing this work for about over 10 years. That's how old I am. And what we do at Open for Business is bring the economic case and the economic angle to LGBTIQ advocacy. And we've done a lot of research detailing how this is important for business, this is important for society, this can help cities grow and become more competitive globally and nationally. I started this work I think I did the first research in Kenya on workplace inclusion policies. And back then we used to call it equal employment opportunities. So these days it's called diversity and inclusion policies. So equal employment opportunities was more demographic, more gender, more of quantitative. Diversity is about the quality each of us have within ourselves and what that quality brings to the table. And so it's broader and more detailed and specific to the different qualities that we all bring to the table. When it comes to business and engaging in LGBTQ advocacy, which I mean, we've done a lot of research on it, including on SDGs. We find that economic performance becomes stronger. Economic performance grows companies when they are LGBTQ inclusive. And I know, we hear some words like it retains talent. The more inclusive a company is, the more you attract and retain talent. And those two words seem like, they're just words coming out of people's mouths. But I like giving an example of, let's say, a wall or a fence in your homestead. If that fence has a crack, I don't feel secure. I don't want to stay in a place that is not secure. I don't feel welcome in a place that is not secure. I don't want to ever go to a place that, the fence is crumbling. And that's the same thing as diversity and inclusion. The minute you create cracks where you allow some of your employees or a majority of your employees to discriminate against a minority group of your employees, then they don't feel welcome. They don't feel included. So their productivity, of course, will reduce. And I'm not a proponent of bringing your whole self to work, but I do want to bring my most productive self to work. There are parts of me that don't belong in my workspace, and that is okay. So I want to bring my most productive self to work. And that is why LGBT business engaging in LGBTQ inclusion is so important. You foster a space where people feel seen. People feel that they can grow up the corporate ladder. People feel that their issues are being attended to, their issues are being listened to. So why is this, why is it that probably a lot of people don't work on this with businesses on inclusion? I think it's a new area and it's gaining momentum. If you look at one of our reports, Channels of Influence, when you look at the year 2018 to where we are now, more and more businesses are beginning to talk about LGBTQ inclusion. More and more businesses are beginning to engage with civil society organizations on business, on inclusion. So it's a growing trend. And I'm hoping that at some point, even right now with what is happening in Ghana, Steve mentioned it earlier, how we are all worried about what is going on in Ghana. We're all worried about what is going on in Kakma. We want to see companies move to a place where you're now talking about these issues. You're posting something and denouncing the treatment or mistreatment of LGBTQ individuals, because these are the people, this is the pool where you get your employees from.
So, this is indeed the pool where you get the employees from. And tied to that, I wanted to talk to Dr. Hilaire. And as Yvonne just said, economic performance grows companies, and you work around poverty and just improving the lives of LGBT people. The question is, what has been done to reduce the poverty for LGBT people? How can LGBT people engage in business if the situation has not been improved? You're on mute. Dr. Hilaire, you're on mute.
Docteur Hilaire, votre micro. Docteur Hilaire, votre micro.
C'est bon?
Oui, maintenant ça va.
Allô? Allô, Christian?
Oui, maintenant ça va, vous pouvez parler. Ça va bien, on vous entend.
OK. La question était de savoir quelles étaient les initiatives que nous avons mises en place pour lutter contre la pauvreté dans le milieu de LGBT, si je comprends bien.
Oui, 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 oui. Et puis, parce que vous travaillez un peu dans le secteur où pour aider la communauté LGBT à avoir accès à l'emploi, tout ça. Donc, c'est
OK.
dans ce sens-là, oui. Oui.
OK. Nous sommes partis d'un constat parce que nous avons eu des évidences à partir d'une enquête que nous avons faite sur l'index de stigmatisation et de discrimination des populations clés qui a été financé par le PNUD. OK. Et cette étude a fait que nous avons eu des évidences que plus de 77%, par exemple, des transgenres connaissaient une exclusion sociale, même pour l'éducation, même pour les soins de santé et surtout pour le travail. Alors, les gens ne leur donnaient pas l'opportunité de les accepter au travail et cela se posait vraiment un grand problème. Mais il y a aussi d'autres catégories. Donc, il faut comprendre, par exemple, les hommes qui ont des rapports sexuels entre hommes, mais surtout les personnes lesbiennes, dont les personnes lesbiennes avaient un accès très, très, très limité aux services sociaux de base, y compris le travail. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous avons vraiment travaillé pour mettre en place des stratégies. Comment faire pour ressortir la communauté dans la pauvreté? Mais du séropositif. Il y a des chances pour accéder aux services sociaux de base suite à la discrimination et à la stigmatisation. Alors, nous avons eu l'opportunité parce qu'il y a l'USAID qui nous a amené été une stratégie qui nous a permis de travailler avec la communauté, de les responsabiliser et de prendre sur tout ce que nous avons comme activité ensemble. Si vous êtes père éducateur, par exemple,
Okay, I think we've lost Dr. Hilaire. He's brought out a whole bunch of issues that I think we need to talk about in detail as we get him back, because technical issues. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Ruth Laborde. We've talked a lot about economic performance of organizations. We've talked about of people and companies. And Dr. Hilaire, before he got cut off, was talking about a stigma index showing that more than 97% of people of our people are facing discrimination, MSM, lesbians, in terms of health services. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we can stop African heads of states from openly declaring war against LGBTQ communities. And they have done this before. You as a member of parliament in Zimbabwe, how can we do this? How can we stop these heads of states from declaring war in our communities? We've seen Kenya, we've seen Uganda, we've seen what is happening in Ghana right now. So what is your opinion on this?
Good morning. First of all, I think I'm hoping later somebody tell me what's happening in Ghana. I've missed that one. But getting back to your question, as a parliament of Zimbabwe, we have approached the issue of LGBTQ and under the disguise of being the community being part of key population. Because we are, as a parliament, we have frequently married them with key population. Even when a speaker gets an invitation, for example, from Sexual Rights Center or GAUS saying we would want to interface with parliamentarians, he actually agrees. He agrees because it's a group of a community we have said we shall not leave behind as we move towards the 2030 SDG goals. So that becomes an entry point for us. We acknowledge that it is not national saying, oh yes, we are free, we recognize LGBT community. No, but we feel it's a hanging fruit that has helped us to keep the agenda of LGBT community on the political table. To say, here it is, yes, we do have a community like this, and they have rights and they need, in particular as a health committee, mostly it's about access to health services. That's what we deal with. So how do we deal? I'm actually very, very worried, by the way, by what I listen.
We seem to be having a bit of an issue hearing you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. I'll say there was a time when SADC parliamentarians were in Pamozi in Lusaka for a meeting on LGBTI in the SADC region. And we were actually reported, and the police wanted to arrest SADC members. But somebody quickly informed the Secretary General for SADC, who phoned other heads of state, and the police were stopped from doing whatever, whether they wanted to arrest us, and were allowed to continue with the meeting. So I believe personally, this community and this AAU SADC, they have a role to play to influence each other. My concern mostly is that we have heads of states who may feel obliged to follow Zambia, to follow Tanzania, or to follow Kenya. But I know, for example, for Zimbabwe, the mentor for our president would be Ramaphosa, for example. Definitely not the likes of Zambia. Otherwise, Zambia has not locked down, and Zimbabwe didn't say, oh, Zambia has got 1,000 cases of COVID, and they've not locked down, so follow them. No, they followed South Africa. Even though South Africa had much higher incidence of COVID than us, but we saw them as a mentor, as somebody there you can follow. I think you need to be very strategic as a community. Identify even countries. I think we have Angola now, you have Mozambique, you have Mauritius. At least that's what I believe. I believe not, because I went to Mauritius for an LGBTI community, and I felt the issue was discussed in the presence of a lot of ministers, and it was not any controversial issue. But at that time, it was still not. It was, one of those things that you do without actually recognizing you're doing something. You quietly, like I think the Zimbabwean situation, where 4 weeks ago we had a meeting with a workshop under the Global Fund, organized by the transgender community. And while we were there, some people started saying, hey, no, MPs, they started saying, according to the Zimbabwean law, transgender people are not supposed to be arrested. Then we had to bring in the constitution to argue among ourselves that the only thing our constitution says is no same-sex marriage. It does not talk about associations. In fact, it says freedom of association. That alone opens a door. And if the transgender have called us to come and talk to us, then the transgender did something that marveled me. They showed a picture of them with the first lady. They had invited her to open one of their workshops. And the whole room went quiet, just to show you that even MPs have no backbones. We are whipped. There are certain individuals whose opinions we cling on to, unfortunately, because the room went quiet and all those dissenting voices kept quiet. Because when the first lady was there, we said, maybe the first lady is the one who is lost. Then they said, no, don't say that. We said, okay, thank you. That allows us to move. So there's, I believe we need at country level, especially if you have certain legalities that could worsen or even put the community at risk. See how you manage it. Manage it properly. Some of us in Zimbabwe have identified that. Currently, the Ministry of Health is running a program for nurses on how to manage ourselves. That is recognition. It is recognition that we do have a community like this. They are entitled to, they have a right, they are entitled to health services, and those who offer services must know how to manage their cases, their peculiarity. I was impressed, and when we raised that, you could see a lot of MPs saying, we said, yes, there's a program like that. There could be a law somewhere which is against Sodom, but there's also a policy which is saying, treat them, do not chase them, and this is how you manage it. So Zimbabwe is always like a hypocritical country, but I think it will get right.
It will definitely get right, and I think that what you've just said on the need to be strategic as a community is something that is absolutely brilliant, and we need to take it on. But I wanted to tie in what you've just said about responses to COVID, and I want to talk to Steve about this. Actually, Steve, you've worked a little bit around coming up with reports on COVID-19. And in this era, basically, why should LGBTI people be specifically included in responses to the pandemic? And the reason why we ask this question is, that we do recognize that we live in not a homogeneous society. So in your opinion, why should LGBTI people be specifically included?
Thanks, Anthony, and again, good morning to colleagues and to participants attending this webinar. I don't know whether even asking the question of why, it is we're talking about citizens, we're talking about people. So any kind of response must target everybody in all their diversity. But now, what is happening? We have many long-standing inequalities and vulnerabilities impacting LGBTI people. I mean, in South Africa, in the region, globally. And even COVID itself actually magnifies, this crisis. And government really requires to, it's required to take action that specifically also target marginalized and left behind communities. The policy response needs to ensure that nobody, is left behind. And I think the SDG, as Dr. Ruth, and even in your remarks, we're talking about, what are these bold commitments that many of our member states have committed to when it comes to 2030 agenda. Now, why this needs to happen? Discrimination that we have seen taking place in the response, even prior to the response, we have to be moving from business as usual and actually target intentionally so marginalized communities in this regard. But what we've seen, we've seen lack of political will, that has really caused, many countries to a large off the track of reaching these targets of leaving no one behind. We've seen many LGBTI persons who have consistently been stigmatized, discriminated, and actually being targeted in many other states. For some other countries, of course, like even in South Africa, it would be indirect kind of discrimination when accessing health. So what are the biggest challenges that we've seen, even delaying of any other person living with HIV accessing treatment, what we have been seeing around, some of the challenges of stigma and discrimination. But what is happening with other countries is where we see the very same stigma and discrimination giving government the power and the magnitude to return to the old trope of blaming LGBTI people for COVID. And these are some of the challenges that we cannot neglect. But why I'm raising the issue of political will? We've seen prior to COVID, we've seen a decriminalization of consensual same-sex relation in countries like Angola, Botswana, but then we've also seen other countries who continue to uphold the criminalization and these colonial laws. We've seen it also in Gabon. But due to the widespread stigma, discrimination, violence, and exclusion from the socioeconomic element, these issues remain unabated, for LGBTI issues, persons. LGBTI people are among the very strata of society with multiple and intersecting identities which compound discrimination, whether you're looking at ethnic, racial, poor living condition, or livelihood for that matter, the intersections that create instability. And this was still existing before the pandemic. And now in the pandemic itself, we're seeing a dire state. We've received many cases of rejection at home, more homophobic and transphobic incidences that occur in home because during the time of lockdown, people are stuck as well with families who are homophobic, or transphobic for that matter. But also the very same pressure of economic instability. We've also seen the intimate partner violence even amongst LGBTI community increasing. So there are some of the disparities that exist around social and structural forces that also would lead to increased health disparities along this process. So I think when we speak about health, we are also talking about whether LGBTI people, whether you're talking health in the context also of the SDG, we have as a global community committed to what we call the universal health coverage. Are we doing it even in the case of a COVID response? Do LGBTI people have access to equitable and affirmative services? And that's a big question. For countries that still criminalize, it's in dire state. For countries that have decriminalized, have they prepared, in emergency cases, how they're going to respond to this, including not just access to health, but also access to food and security, access to housing. We've seen homelessness. And I think some of these curfews and policies that were enforced, really still, as I've indicated, have continued to give us a widespread spread of harassment, abuse, and in many other cases, it's also death for that matter. So it is a bit of a concern on how we address stigma and discrimination in the response of COVID.
Yeah, it is. And sadly, I mean, the way the governments are returning to that old, it's the gays' fault is absolutely saddening. Do you mind just talking a little bit about what is happening in Ghana?
No, definitely. Look, we've seen a rise of religious, fundamentalism that continues in Ghana, which also, by virtue of those activities, have been now targeting LGBTI leaders, activists, and even the organization that was forced to shut down 2 days ago. I mean, the situation of harassment, of arrests, I mean, it is really quite difficult, and actually now people are going into hiding for that matter. So for me, the dangers of what is happening in Ghana, it's actually what has been a long history of this violence that we have seen and discrimination that is targeting LGBTI persons. So I mean, it is no brainer in terms of how people clone or work to get LGBTI violently out of the system and target them for violation. So that is the current situation. The police, the religious groups that have perpetuated some of these acts actually are really, making sure that people live an underground or so of kind of life. I mean, this is really around the multiple violence or violation around people's livelihood, but also around the work of activism in protecting human rights.
Thank you for that. And it's really sad that that's happening. And but before we go on, I wanted to bring this back to you, the audience, and I want to put up another poll, and it's also tying into everything that we've actually just spoken about, from political will, from including businesses, from including the conversation about Ghana. And the question is, in Africa, which of the following are the most important reasons why LGBTI people are excluded or marginalized in efforts to achieve the SDGs? We are still having conversations around the SDGs. So why, which of the following are the most important reasons why LGBTI people and issues are excluded or marginalized in efforts to achieve the SDGs? And you please select your top 3 reasons. So the number 1 reason there is policymakers don't think about LGBTI people or issues. Number 2 is negative public attitudes about LGBTI people. Number 3, punitive or oppressive laws. Number 4, politicians are not willing to show leadership on human rights. Number 5, discrimination against LGBTI plus people in housing and employment. Number 6, the other issues and communities are seen as more important. And number 7, policymakers don't know how to reach and include LGBTI people. So, and we will go and we will show the responses to this in a moment. But I also wanted to look at some of the comments and questions that are coming in. We have Henry, who's also sent a link from Sky News saying coronavirus LGBT groups are targeted in Uganda. So in Uganda, individuals and groups were targeted during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have a comment about, Dorothy Ogutu says, Steve, thank you for speaking about political will. This is really a huge gap in bringing issues of stigma and discrimination against LGBTI persons. Just this week, we have seen African governments opposing key populations attending HLM AIDS 2021. How are we to meet the targets of ending AIDS if we are deliberately leaving key populations out of critical global, regional, and national conversations, policy making, influencing spaces that affect their lives? Now, let's look at the results of this poll, and thank you so much for participating in it. And it's interesting that the majority of people said that the reason why, the important reasons why LGBTI people are excluded in efforts to achieve SDGs is negative public attitudes and punitive oppressive laws. That is essentially what is happening in Ghana. That is essentially what is happening across the continent. Negative public attitudes. And then the second 2 is policymakers don't think about LGBT issues, and politicians are not willing to show leadership on human rights. Now, I'm going to go to you, Dr. Ruth Labode, and it's to talk about this particular results of this poll, that there are negative attitudes about LGBTI people, there are punitive and oppressive laws, and politicians are not willing to show leadership on human rights. You are a politician who has shown incredible leadership on human rights issues. So the question is, how do we ensure that that continues? How do we make more of you? Dr. Ruth, I think you're still on mute. Yes.
I'm back.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
You can, eh?
Yes.
You can? Okay, thank you. The network is bad, I can feel it, but that is very, very correct. The results, the negative public impression of LGBTI created by our tradition and our religious leaders, the negative things that you have, the opinion leaders have or, you know, the insults you hear in parliament, you'll be surprised that the parliament of Zimbabwe may have 5 or 6 gay men or lesbians. But you hear, if you do something that is, if somebody feels they need to insult you, they will say, even though you have not come out is a way of then we on the you sex worker sit down.
Dr. Ruth, sorry, Dr. Ruth, your network is a little bit off now. Oh, I'm so sorry. We can hardly hear you. Okay, Dr. Ruth is going to join back, and welcome back, Dr. Hilaire. And I'm sorry that we're having such technical issues today. It's just one of those days. But you know what? We will have this conversation. We were just talking to Dr. Ruth about.
Hi, back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that the way we use the words like "stabane," which means you gay man in parliament, not as a nice way, as an insult, or you sex worker to a female MP, it's an insult. It's the way we're socialized, that it is taboo to be gay or to be lesbian. And that is what has formed the public opinion. But also, I know what really changes the opinion. Parliamentarians definitely would rather avoid talking about issues to do with LGBTI community, rather just ignore them. But the role that civil society organizations in Zimbabwe have played in capacitating and making honorable MPs understand that there is a community like this, and LGBTQ means this, and this is who they are, and these are needs, has changed a lot of attitudes in parliament. And I was saying, even though you may so that we have gay men, these people are, so when those insults, because they are maybe penalized for who I am, so you find that the other people who are willing to stand up and hold back the insults are maybe even women more, because the people who seem to actually support LGBTQ are more women parliamentarians than men.
That is fascinating. And
of course, no, let me talk about punitive laws.
Yes.
I recently had a chat with the Minister of Justice, because in Zimbabwe, the only law that is problematic is the codification against Sodom. If we removed that law in Zimbabwe, it is the end. There is no more law. And it means, so how are we to remove it? I told the Minister of Justice, I said, we want to put condoms in prison, but we cannot put condoms in prison when we have a law that says Sodom is a crime. So if we remove it in disguise of wanting to put condoms, we have also released the community that you suspect. By the way, even hetero couples you do Sodom, so that Sodom issue should really be followed even in normal heterogeneous couples in their homes. So I think that get is to say, let's remove that law, because it
Sorry, Dr. Ruth, we can't hear you, but I think the main point you're saying is that we need to remove these punitive laws. And I think it is one of the main priorities for a huge amount of organizations and peoples out there. Dr. Hilaire, I want to come back to you. And I think we didn't actually finish what you were talking about. And I want to talk about, I want you to talk about how COVID-19 has affected the financial situation of LGBTI people in your community, in your country, and just broadening it and thinking about the fact that this is COVID-19 and these are LGBTI people and these are SDGs that we need to be going towards, the Sustainable Development Goals. How has it affected, and what has been done? What have you as an organization, as a community, as an individual done to in your experience to make things better? I think you're on mute.
Votre micro, docteur Hilaire, votre micro. Oui.
Oui, c'est comme je dis que COVID-19 a affecté beaucoup de communautés et surtout les économies. Hein. Au niveau de la RDC ici, la communauté était confrontée à beaucoup de problèmes. D'abord, il faut prendre les problèmes sur le plan sanitaire. Sur le plan sanitaire, déjà, c'est une population, une communauté qui est affectée, qui est pauvre. Une population qui ne pouvait vivre que grâce à la survie de chaque jour. Maintenant, avec COVID-19, il y avait le confinement. Le confinement fait que on ne pouvait pas, il y avait beaucoup de restrictions sur le droit pour des raisons sanitaires. Alors, ceux qui travaillent avec les petits moyens qu'on leur a donnés, avec de petits crédits qu'on leur octroie, ils étaient affectés d'abord sur le plan économique. Sur le plan économique, ils ne pouvaient pas payer un loyer, par exemple, un loyer dans son restaurant, par exemple, dans son bar, parce que il n'a plus de moyens et que le bailleur exige toujours qu'il doit payer. Alors, comment ça a affecté? Ça affecte de façon à ce que si vous ne payez pas le loyer, on doit le mettre dehors. Alors, nous avons fait le plan de résilience. Avec le plan de résilience, nous avons pratiquement donné des petits crédits grâce aux initiatives que nous avons développées depuis longtemps, que je vous ai parlé, grâce à l'appui de l'USAID qui nous a amené l'approche avec. Alors, quand on voulait les sortir, nous prenons par exemple le coût de loyer. Nous payons et la communauté LGBT est épargnée pour le mettre dehors, pour les mettre dehors. Ça a permis à ce que sa petite économie puisse marcher. Mais aussi, ceux qui sont malades, donc les PVVIH, avaient beaucoup de problèmes parce qu'à un certain moment, il y a eu rupture des stocks de médicaments. Rupture pas au niveau structurel, mais plutôt dans la façon de dispatcher, dans la façon de voir la population quitter de là où il est pour rejoindre l'hôpital. Et l'hôpital, par exemple, qui n'a pas pris de dispositions grâce à Covid pour les servir à temps. Donc, il y a eu un peu de rupture par-ci, par-là, même des ruptures des intrants. Et nous avons créé aussi une résilience. Qu'est-ce que nous avons fait? Au lieu d'attendre que la communauté LGBT vienne à l'hôpital vers nous, mais nous avons développé un mécanisme d'aller vers. C'est-à-dire, nous prenons les médicaments, on refait un peu une cartographie pour savoir qui est où, et s'il s'est déplacé, où est-ce qu'il s'est fait confiner. Nous avons commencé à donner les antirétroviraux. Donc, c'était les initiatives que nous avons fait face à la COVID-19. Mais il y avait aussi cette stigmatisation qui s'est accentuée parce qu'à un certain moment, ils ne pouvaient pas encore mouvoir librement dans la communauté. Dès qu'ils sont là, et on les dit, voilà, les LGBT sont là, ils viennent perturber l'ordre, ils viennent faire ceci. Et avec ça, nous avons développé carrément le mécanisme de voir que chacun puisse vraiment rester chez soi et que les petits besoins.
Okay.
Que nous avons au niveau call center.
Right.
Ces call centers là, ça nous permet à la fois sur le plan des viols, quand ils sont violés, nous avons fait un effort pour développer les mécanismes d'assistance juridique, d'assistance psychologique et d'assistance médicale à domicile et puis amener le problème auprès des juridictions judiciaires grâce à une ONG qui est aussi ici, CIVICUS, pour voir comment répondre à ces besoins. C'est comme ça que Covid a vraiment affecté la communauté LGBT et nous avons développé des mécanismes pour la résilience.
Thank you, Dr. Hilaire, and I'm sorry that we are having such technical issues today. It's one of those days, but you know that's our lives now. But it's brilliant that you talked about what you're doing in the DRC, the you know, assisting people financially, assisting people psychologically, giving them psychological assistance. That's brilliant. And I'm going to ask each of you at the end of this, towards the end of this, to give us your top 3 priorities that will enhance inclusion and ensure equity of LGBTQ people. But I want to go into one other question. There is a question. I'm going to ask this to Steve. Steve, there's a question here from Mr. Shimbalanga. Is there a logical explanation why it is only now that the world is slowly starting to address the issue of inclusion of LGBTI people when you have been talking about equality and non-discrimination for a long time? What do you think?
Look, I think the one thing we need to appreciate is the efforts of activists, the effort of resilience by LGBTI community, and also the effort of really affirming and claiming the rights. First, there is this treaty, which is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, and a lot of people understand what this treaty means globally in the context of their own livelihood in countries. So domestication of it means what goes into the constitution and how many of the constitution in many countries still need to reform. Look, we have a history of being colonized in many countries. There are quite a lot of countries in the region and other regions that have been colonized. And how we have to repair the injustices of the past, it's by virtue of decriminalizing and changing these colonial laws. Why the hell are countries still holding on to colonial laws and the colonial legacy? And I think the attitude by virtue of training, that by virtue of building allies, by virtue of understanding that everybody exists and everybody is diverse, it's quite important. So the logic explanation for me is that the era is changing, but it's also changing with a just approach to it. And what we need is really about that very will, not only just from politicians, but the will of other allies, religious groups, traditional groups, and ordinary broader society to take up and stand up against unjust systems.
Thank you so much. The will and of people to stand up. I'm going to go to you, Yvonne. And there was a question that was asked, and basically the fact that thank you for, but how can the LGBTI people have this inclusion in the work systems? And a lot of this stigma comes from first the education system, and they tend to drop out and run away as they're seen as immoral, or lack of an education leads to lack of knowledge, and workspaces require certification and skills. So how do we balance that? And coming exactly from what Steve has said, she just said that there are colonial laws that exist, and we need to get out of them. But how can we get out of them if and participate in the work system if the stigma comes from education?
Thank you, Anthony. I think for me, when we did the last poll, for me, politicians come before the removal of punitive laws in my head, because they push for these punitive laws to be removed if we work hand in hand with politicians. Now, businesses also come in and use or leverage the economic power they have to ensure that this happens, while religious while the religious fundamentalism is going on, we have the business community that can do something to counter this religious fundamentalism. But also we have structures within businesses where they have their corporate social responsibility. When someone is kicked out of their homes and their parents refuse to pay for education, businesses can put a chunk of whatever money they have for corporate social responsibility and support some of the LGBTIQ communities that want to further their education and get certain skills to do certain jobs. Or if it's, let's say, pick your refugees, have sort of a program within your company to engage with these refugees and give them some form of work, to be able to get some form of employment, some form of money to be able to sustain their livelihoods. And, sorry?
No,
yes.
Just go ahead, sorry.
Okay. Then I feel that will balance out some of these gaps that are experienced by LGBTIQ people because of the homophobia and the social attitudes that exist. But then it also does not only, engagement with business and inclusion at the workplace is not only an issue of getting employed by a company. Companies have supply chains. Why don't they use these supply chains to ensure that company A, B, and C, which provides printers to us, is inclusive of LGBTQ people, or their policies are supportive of LGBTQ people? It does not only exist within the walls of companies, it's also without. UNDP right now, you have people who supply you with different things. Do you ensure that these people are people who are supportive of LGBTQ individuals? Do you reach out to LGBTQ-owned businesses? Because that economic empowerment creates a shift for how advocacy is done within our continent. Economic leverage makes such a huge difference. That is why businesses and companies and the private sector has a lot of economic leverage, because of the economic power. The governments listen to economic people who have this economic power. And so we, as LGBTQ individuals, we need to be able to access these spaces. But right now we have not yet been able to get a sort of like a good percentage of us or a good percentage of organizations in these spaces. So that is why then the business community comes in, a very small chunk of the religious community are also, speaking out against these atrocities that are faced by the LGBTQ communities, these exclusions, economic, social, educational exclusion. So yeah, I think that's how that balance is created. And I know there's also, of course, many other ways.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, as you said, economic leverage is important. I'm going to switch this up a little bit now. I'm going to ask the panelists to contribute to something, to just think of something and write it down. Just think of three things, and I'm going to get back to the participants just now. If the panelists can, and I will come back to you, if you can just write down for yourselves as the participants do another poll, what are the three top, if you could please share the top three of your SDG priorities that will enhance inclusion and ensure equity of LGBT people in sub-Saharan African countries. Just think about that. And while you, as the panelists, are thinking about your top three, and I will come back to you to give us your top three, I want to pull up another poll for the participants to participate in. It's also, can I get the next poll? It's poll 3. How can we most effectively promote attention to LGBTI people in SDG work in Africa? Please select one answer. And of the answers, the first one is advocate around the needs and rights of LGBTI people. Number 2, advocate around leave no one behind, including LGBTI as well as other groups. And 3, a mixed approach, including both focused LGBTI advocacy and broader Leave No One Behind advocacy. So that's the poll for the participants, and that was a question for the panelists. It is 10 o'clock. We have about 25 minutes left in the panel, but there are a few questions that are coming through that are absolutely brilliant and we need to talk about. But that one is very specific. It is specific around SDG work, and it's specific around what you think as our panelists, as our experts on this. So I'll come to you, and I'll come to each of you now, and give you 2 minutes to talk about the three things. 2 minutes to talk about the three things that you have written down. I'll start with you, Steve.
Thanks, Anthony. I think, for us to have a really focused, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
To really have a focused SDG approach, we need governments to adopt a strong and inclusive policies and measures that effectively really consult and engage communities. One, on consistently and strong holding service providers, government, law enforcement, and policymakers accountable for discrimination and human rights violation. Because I think there's a big issue around the purpose of the work that we're doing. We've committed to Resolution 275, and we cannot continue seeing these violations happen, and there's little accountability. The second thing, it's really about meaningfully including LGBTI people in all decision-making processes and concerns. LGBTI persons are not just beneficiaries of any response. They are also contributors to the response and contributors with excellence as well. The last one, really, it's about how we amplify the needs of LGBTI people in social protection, in economic opportunities, and as well as community-led organizations that needs to be fully funded to really increase the efforts around human rights at national, regional, and international level. And this will help us in assisting accountability and improvement of our response. Those are possibly my three contributions.
The community.
I am muted. That is brilliant, and I like the fact that you talked about strong and inclusive policies. I'll go to you, Dr. Ruth. What are your three things? And as you can see, the host has shared the... Hello, Dr. Ruth?
Hello?
Yes.
I shared the what?
No, I was saying that the poll results are out, and it is a mixed approach, including both focused LGBTI advocacy and Leave No One Behind advocacy. That's what has won with 82% of the vote.
I'll tell you where I come from. I read some of the questions. People were saying we should stop trying to use health as entry point for launching the LGBTI community there. LGBTI community has always been known in the communities, especially in Zimbabwe. This is why we have names in every tribe for a gay man, because it's time immemorial. So the entry point for health is for trying to make government or change public opinion, especially among the younger people or the society per se. So for me, it's important. Is it number 8 or number 9? That reduces inequalities. For me, that one is very important. Number 2 SDG that I would push seriously is the health. The health, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. The health is important for us because we have used it to make the president not use derogatory messages when he's communicating. Because if he does, that's the end. The next thing, people will be arrested. So if Mugabe, our ex-president, was alive today, the LGBT community would be arrested now. But the message we have been using would be, leave no one behind. We have acknowledged we have this community and that community, this vulnerable group, that including the LGBTI community. And once they even staged the demo once in my hometown, and the president was asked, why did you allow that? He then said, I have more important things to do in this country than follow on how people are having sex. For me, that was a big score, but the entry point was health, but his answer was not health. And then the other one is number 17. Number 17 is very important for partnerships, whether international, whether inter-country, regional groupings like SADC and others. Those are very, very important in pushing leadership to actually understand that this is an issue and we may not achieve our SDG goals unless we deal with it, or we accept that we do have a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ruth. And I think the SDG 17 on partnerships is also a really good entry point, because look at us here talking in partnership with very different organizations. Is there any panelist who hasn't said? Dr. Hilaire, you've talked about your 3 things.
Oui, je dis que l'inclusion doit être vraiment quelque chose de très, très important et on doit l'encourager. Ça doit s'associer à supprimer toutes les lois qui paraissent un peu floues. Hein, des lois, par exemple, en RDC, on ne comprend pas, donc c'est ni oui ni non. Alors, nous devons travailler pour que les lois soient compréhensibles pour la communauté LGBTI. Nous devons favoriser cette inclusion. C'est comme nous avons fait avec les approches pour lutter contre la pauvreté. Nous avons inclus dans toutes nos activités et nous avons une industrie sociale qui produit de l'eau. Nous avons pris sur les 15 personnes clés qui travaillent, 9 sont de la communauté LGBTI. Donc, ce sont des exemples plus pratiques que nous trouvons qu'avec ça, nous devons aller en avant. Et il y a la société civile aussi qui doit travailler la main dans cette inclusivité, qu'on voit vraiment l'estime de soi, qu'on voit vraiment l'acceptation de cette communauté dans la population générale. Mais dans d'autres structures aussi privées, qu'on puisse voir des gens qu'on doit accepter pour donner du travail parce qu'ils ont beaucoup de compétences. Ils sont capables de prouver de quoi ils sont capables. Ce ne sont pas des personnes qu'on doit laisser de côté. Donc, ce sont des défis majeurs et nous trouvons qu'il faut que nous les fassions. Non seulement en RDC, mais dans toute l'Afrique. Nous devons voir des changements palpables. Nous devons voir des changements qui disent que maintenant, nous ne sommes plus comme avant, mais nous devons accepter tout le monde. Parce que si nous négligeons la communauté LGBTI, nous ne faisons en réalité rien. Nous n'allons pas atteindre tous les objectifs que nous avons assignés pour le développement durable. Voilà un peu les atouts majeurs que j'ai trouvés qu'il faut les partager et qu'il faut défendre. Nous allons continuer. Voilà un peu ce que j'avais à dire.
Thank you, Dr. Hilaire. Yvonne?
Thank you, Anthony. So we, as Open for Business, we've done a report on business engagement and LGBTQ inclusion with specific focus on SDGs. It's so hard to pick 3, but my top 3 would be 1, I think it's SDG 11, better cities. In Kenya, our research found that we're losing 18 billion to 130 billion in economic gains because of LGBTQ discrimination. And this is money that could go to give 2.2 million students free secondary education. It could give 200 students free university education and 1,000, and it could also build our infrastructure and greatly improve our infrastructure. Of course, if our roads are not costing 100 billion to construct. So that covers sort of education and cities and infrastructure. The second one would be no poverty. Just whether you own a business, whether you're someone who's working at UN or whatever, wherever it is you're working, be conscious about the people you're engaging with, the people you do business with. Ask questions. Are you inclusive in your company? Do you encourage freedom and dignity for all? Do you act towards freedom and dignity for all? Then the third one is health. the governments recognize most at-risk populations. So approach different companies. If it's your GlaxoSmithKline, approach them and tell them, hey, we want to partner with you. We want to have like a 5-year partner, not a 6-month partnership. Give us free ARVs, give us, basically just work with different companies to ensure that you're part of their CSO strategy. Those are my top 3 SDGs. I've actually mentioned 4, yes.
Yes, you have mentioned 4, but that's okay. I mean, but the main thing that has come through from everyone is health is one of the main SDG that needs to be tackled, that will help bring equality for LGBT people. There is a question that I want to tackle as well, and I'm going to ask you, Steve, to answer this. I think I should be asking Honorable Ruth for that, but I'm going to ask you, Steve, because you also part of the, you do a lot of political, you have a lot of political experience in the field. Now, the question is from Bradley, and he said, Botswana decriminalized consensual same-sex sexual activities last year, but we still have not seen a change in leaders supporting and pushing inclusion of LGBTQ persons in Botswana. Instead, MPs blame COVID-19 in Botswana on LGBT people. Exclusion of sexual and gender minorities still remains high, especially in developmental and civic engagements. How would you speak to that?
I think this is a very important question that was raised. Any kind of change, particularly if it goes through the judicial process, that changes the law and it's not necessarily enforced by the government, it doesn't necessarily automatically mean there will be immediate implementation. There's quite a lot of things that must go into it, and we rely on LGBTI organizations. We rely on those, few members of parliament who are allies or government who needs to be pushed, supported, and also created that space of change. I mean, if you take what has happened in South Africa, the constitution that was drafted in 96, approved in 96 actually, and adopted, that really signifies the importance of not discriminating anybody on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, gender, and other grounds. But it means that, what does the constitution mean if it changes? You need additional things, policies, programs, and specifically highlight the critical need policies that needs to be in place. So for me, it's not a matter of automatic. I'm going to request that, Botswana colleagues, comrades that we always work with, invest in that effort. And even the allies that are listening, United Nations plays a role in advising government as well, or supporting governments in countries. It means that we need to maximize our efforts. We need to claim our space. And by virtue of that decrim, you have something as Botswana community to hold on to and hold the state to account, and don't let it go, because chances are that another a very well organized group can come back and reverse those gains because it was done accordingly. So we need to safeguard our rights, and it doesn't come just automatic implementation. It comes with a lot of effort that goes into it.
Yeah, I think Dr. Ruth, you have your hand up because we mentioned MPs.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, for me, I would actually throw a party. I would celebrate that legal victory, because Zimbabweans are very legalistic. The minute a chief justice in Zimbabwe announced that the police have been misinterpreting the law that they were using to arrest sex workers, saying they were soliciting for things misinterpreted. The violence against sex workers just dropped, boom, and not one and run to the Zimbabwe.
Dr. Ruth, just
I think you are losing.
Village, because it's not about the law.
Yeah.
Just say that again. We lost you, and you said violence against sex workers dropped.
You're losing Dr. Ruth.
Uh, okay, yeah, that connection is not so clear, Dr. Ruth. Do you mind just rebooting and then really say?
But Anthony, maybe just on that point that was raised by Bradley.
Okay.
You know, besides just the decriminalization, there are certain pockets of excellence even in Botswana. If you look at the case of Ricky, where there was an ID change, you know, gender marker change, a case was won. So there are many other cases that are won in Botswana, and what Dr. Ruth is emphasizing is about a celebration of constitutional judgments that actually guarantees and assures people of their human rights. And that's a cornerstone or something that we need to arm ourselves with. It means that the judicial system, which is one of the arm of state, the state is not just government, it's parliament, it's government, it's judiciary. So that means an active arm of state is quite strong, and it's quite affirming of human rights. And if these measures can be used, and these measures could be celebrated as well. And I think that's also what Dr. Ruth was also emphasizing.
It's brilliant that you mentioned that, and I think it is important for us to celebrate our legal wins. I just want to ask again. We have 9 minutes left in this panel. Again, I'm going to include you, the participants. There is a poll that's about to come up on screen, and there it is. So it's a bit of a longer poll, and it's a multiple choice poll. So what do you see as the two most important actions to increase and improve LGBTI inclusion in SDG efforts in Africa? What are the two most important actions? So let's move from the conversation that we've been having to actual actions. So one, data, disaggregate data on how LGBTI people are being left behind. Two, train SDG activists and development professionals on LGBTI issues. Three, train LGBTI activists on SDG issues and processes. Four, peer support and networking amongst supportive politicians, like Dr. Ruth. Five, promote inclusive social norms among the public. 6, provide LGBTI-related technical support to specific sectors, health, social protection, education, etc. 7, strategic litigation and law reform work. 8, monitor and respond to anti-LGBTI actors and campaigns. Now, this poll is actually taking us to the end of the session. And I know that there have been quite a number of questions that we may not have actually addressed, but this is because this conversation is quite deep and quite intense, and we need more time. But we will be continuing these conversations. Everything that has been sent on the question and answers, all the links will be emailed to you directly. And as you answer this poll, just think about what actions can we take? What specific actions can we take? And as you answer it, I'm actually going to put my own answers as well because I am biased. But as you answer it, I want to go around to the panelists and ask you to give us a closing statement. And I'm so sorry, Dr. Ruth and Dr. Hilaire, we're having such technical issues with the network. But I'll start with you, Dr. Ruth. Just a closing statement from this conversation. If you could just tell us what you think. How do we get this conversation moving forward?
In my opinion, number
don't know. I'm sorry, Dr. Ruth, we didn't get any.
Used in the learning from others. You didn't hear anything?
Yeah, just say it again.
How come
now.
I hear you when you speak? Hello?
I don't know. I don't know. Just say it again.
No, I think for me, peer review, learning from countries where there's good practice, for me has been very good. And the SADC has played, that PF has played a very, very important role in exposing parliamentarians to what other countries are doing as far as the LGBTI community and their issues are concerned. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So I really feel I've not had this come from, I've not seen the LGBTI community itself making an effort to say, okay, as girls, we think we should go with the 2 MPs to Mauritius if there's a conference there. No. And yet, if you went as a team, which is what sexual reproductive rights activists do, they go with you somewhere where there's a conference on abortion. When you come, you are creating a task force. Oh, now let's create a task force. But with LGBTI community, somehow there's this, there isn't this cohesion, which I really have seen with SRH activists. SRH either for you to go and meet their development partners and say 1 or 2 words, and when you come back home, they're saying, by the way, what happened in Kenya? Let's form a task.
Right. Sorry, Dr. Ruth, and I hear you. I hear you that we need to do more. LGBT activists need to engage more, and we have 4 more minutes. Sorry to catch you off.
Steve, Steve.
Sorry to cut you off. I'm going to go to Steve now, and we have 4 more minutes. Now, the poll has come through, and 2 of the most important things are desegregate data and provide LGBTI-related technical support to specific actors. Now, Steve, can I come to you? Closing statements, 1 minute.
So, look, I think states, governments, have a responsibility, including stakeholders, by the way, because we're still not only just challenged by the notion of government, we are challenged by the notion of various other social actors like religious groups, traditional groups, and so forth, even within the private sector. There's a responsibility that everybody has to address the unique challenges of stigma, discrimination, violence, and criminalization faced by LGBTI persons, inside and outside any kind of pandemics, whether you're talking COVID, you're talking HIV and so forth. Our lives don't only just revolve around access to health. It also revolves around livelihoods. It revolves around, confidence in living as a citizen, and even many other responsibility. 2030 development agenda requires us to reach those goals that are put across, and there is existence of how all of us can, be part of that very same change. And I agree, of course, with Dr. Ruth. We can do more. We expect allies also to do more jointly. This is collective effort. Thank you so much for the space as well.
Thank you so much, Steve, and joint collective effort. Dr. Hilaire, 1 minute, just a closing statement.
Oui, la responsabilité est grande, et ici, un mot, c'est pour dire que le gouvernement aussi doit contribuer. Parce que la question que nous abordons est tellement importante, ça contribue au développement des personnes, au développement économique. Mais le gouvernement ici doit assurer ce que nous appelons la redistribution équitable, parce qu'ici, il s'agit de l'équitabilité. Donc, il doit y avoir une redistribution équitable des ressources nationales. Pour que dans cette équitabilité, la communauté LGBTI, qui est encore plus pauvre, nous savons que les pays sont pauvres, mais cette communauté est encore plus pauvre. Il doit accéder aux services. Donc, les gouvernements et la société civile et toutes les parties prenantes doivent conjuguer vraiment la main dans la main pour qu'on arrive à s'en sortir. Mais surtout, travailler sur la Constitution pour que la Constitution ne demeure pas muette par rapport à la question des LGBTI. Je sais qu'il y a beaucoup d'avancements, tels que c'est reconnu qu'on ne peut pas discriminer les populations vulnérables. Quand même, ce sont des avancées. Mais il faut que ces avancées soient claires sur le plan constitutionnel. On doit avoir des constitutions qui doivent dire clairement que cette population doit être protégée, la discrimination, l'homophobie, la stigmatisation et tout ce qui est de négatif, même des choses punitives, les attitudes punitives de la communauté doivent ne plus avoir lieu donc, à cette époque. Voilà un peu ce que j'ai à contribuer pour qu'on puisse arriver à l'équitabilité. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Yvonne, you have 30 seconds.
Mine would be just to encourage civil society organizations to continue working with different messengers of impact. And one of those messengers is, of course, businesses, like I've been mentioning throughout. And we are working with the other foundation, Workplace Pride, to come up with a CSO toolkit on how to engage with the private sector, how to harness the economic power that the private sector has. So I think, yeah, looking at new messengers of impact, looking at new ways of advocating and advocacy is quite important, even in the eventuality that, let's say, these countries that have still not decriminalized, do decriminalize, there's still that work that needs to be done after, so that laws are not changed later on when new governments come in.
Brilliant. And from my part, I would thank you so much, Yvonne. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Steve, Dr. Hilaire, Dr. Ruth. Yvonne, you've been brilliant. It has been a fantastic conversation. I'd like to thank the participants for all the questions that you've come through with. I'd like to thank the team and the team at ECA for making this space, and the team at CIVICUS and Positive Vibes and UNDP for creating this space. We will have more of these webinars in the next few months. So these conversations do not stop here. They will keep going. And I know, as we've said today, it is a joint effort, and we need to celebrate our wins, but keep pushing on. So thank you all so much. And oh yeah, cannot forget again the interpreters. You've been brilliant in keeping us, understanding each other. So thank you all so much for the time. I will see you again in the next webinar, and goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.